What did Middleton prove last night?
What I've been preaching time and time again, that he's the Batman of this team.
You know good and well Giannis ain't KD. Let's pump the brakes now. Like, Giannis is great. He's phenomenal.
What is it that
he
Giannis
ain't Kevin
doesn't do?
Durant.
Shut up.
They'll appreciate it more, but I wish I could just run and with 7 feet and run and just dunk. Like, that takes no skill at all. I got to actually learn how to play basketball.
Over the past 5 years, one of the most controversial and divisive superstars among fans, analysts, even current players, has been Giannis Antetokounmpo, in large part due to his physical gifts, his dominance in the paint, and his overall ability to bully any player on the fast break. And when it comes to NBA fans, there's usually two groups when it comes to Giannis. The first camp, you have normal NBA fans who recognize Giannis as a dominant two-way player and one of the best players in NBA history. Now the second group I would call the tween hezzy splash group. These NBA fans, all they care about is skill, flashy moves, handles, and they hate quote-unquote unskilled players like Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I know it sounds funny, but even current day players and players in the 90s and 2000s hate on Giannis for not being skilled. And there's a couple of players who have made headlines in the past few months taking unwarranted shots at the two-time MVP. One of those players being Tracy McGrady. And T-Mac is very clear in saying he thinks Giannis would struggle in his era due to a lack of jump shot, the paint being more clogged, there being less spacing, and his overall game being predictable when it comes to going downhill. Now, I will agree with T-Mac on one thing: the 2000s, in his era, they had harder defense. But even with that being said, Giannis in his era would have feasted. And to prove T-Mac wrong, let's look at his best ever year in 2003. The NBA at that point, the pace was much slower, and the overall scores of games was way lower compared to 2022. And looking at NBA players that year, there were 25 guys who averaged above 20 points per game. Now remember T-Mac's big point saying Giannis would have struggled in this era due to a lack of jump shot. Look at those 25 players who averaged above 20 points. Out of that group, 12 of them, nearly half, shot under 31% from 3. That includes Allen Iverson, who averaged 27 points per game, Shaq, who averaged 27, Paul Pierce, who averaged 26, and Duncan, Garnett, and Webber, who all averaged 23. Those 6 players right there, while shooting sub 31% from 3, were in the top 10 in scoring for the NBA that year. And think about Giannis. He's 6'11" and 242 on a bad day. His overall physique and athletic ability is better than Webber, Garnett, Duncan, Pierce, Iverson, as well as Shaq. And to put it pretty simply, if Allen Iverson, a guard who's barely 6 feet tall, can average nearly 28 points per game, I think Giannis will be perfectly fine. And speaking of Allen Iverson, during his prime, he was one of the most dominant players when it came to scoring in the paint. And looking at the 03 season, AI was top 10 in paint scoring, along with Gary Payton, Stephon Marbury, Baron Davis, as well as Kobe Bryant. Those 5 guards right there were all top 10 in paint scoring, and for the most part, they were very efficient while doing so. So once again, I ask you guys, as well as T-Mac, what is stopping Giannis from dominating like those guards back in the 2000s? Now, looking at another former NBA player, we have Charles Oakley, whose take on Giannis is even more outlandish. As in this article, he says Giannis wouldn't have been a force in his era, and at best would have been a 6th man coming off the bench.
Shut your stupid ass up!
Now, like we did with T-Mac's quote, let's break this down one by one. Looking at Charles Oakley's peak and his absolute best year, that was in 1987, where he averaged 14.5 points per game. So for sake of argument, we'll we're going to use this year as Charles Oakley's era. Looking at 1987, the best 6 men, they were Ricky Pierce, Vinnie Johnson, as well as Michael Cooper. All those players are great players for their respective era. But compared to Giannis Antetokounmpo, these guys don't stand a chance. Someone like Michael Cooper, he was a string bean, Vinnie Johnson was kind of overweight, and Ricky Pierce was a solid NBA player, but really nothing spectacular. Imagine someone saying LeBron James or Kevin Durant in the 1970s would have been coming off the bench. That's how crazy Oakley's statement is about Giannis in the 80s. It makes absolutely no sense. Or reversing it, someone saying Michael Jordan in today's NBA would come off the bench and be a poor man's Zach LaVine. That's how bad Charles Oakley's quote is, and it makes absolutely no sense. And looking at the actual facts of the matter, in 1987, there were 27 NBA players who averaged above 20 points per game. Out of those 27, 21 of them shot under 30% from 3. And out of that group, 12 of them shot under 20%. And actually looking at the NBA's leading scorer that year, that was Michael Jordan, who averaged 37 points per game on 18% shooting from 3. So looking at the late 80s, the early 90s, 3-point shooting was not at a premium. And for an NBA star, they could be amazing without a great jump shot. I'm not saying Giannis would average 40, but in the 80s, he would have got his numbers and been a very, very effective player. And I would argue, he's one of the few modern day players who actually be better suited for the 80s as well as the 90s. Now, looking at a current day player who downplays Giannis, we have Andre Iguodala. In the past few days, he had some very head-scratching quotes, saying Rasheed Wallace in today's NBA would be better than Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Come on, man. What are we talking about?
And his one major claim as to why that is because Rasheed had a great outside shot and was versatile on the offensive end. Now, while that is true, that being the case doesn't make Rasheed better than Giannis in today's NBA. And on one hand, I think Rasheed Wallace is actually kind of underrated, and in today's NBA, it would be much better suited for him, as in his era, he was definitely ahead of his time. But when looking at someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo, on the defensive end, he's miles better than Sheed. And on offense for Giannis, he's been a top 5 scorer since 2018. And I think calling Rasheed Wallace a knockdown sniper, one of the best shooters of all time, is kinda overblown. He was a decent shooter, his career average being 33.6, and his best year shooting above 40%. But looking at his 9-year peak, at his best, he shot 34.3%, which compared to today's players is average. And looking at Rasheed's era, let's say at best, he was a top 20 player. What Andre Iguodala is saying, in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, there were 20 different players who were better than Giannis. That is by far the craziest thing about this statement, saying Rasheed Wallace, a borderline top 20 player, was better than Giannis, the definitive best player in 2022. It makes no sense, and it simply boggles the mind. And looking past those guys' quotes, one thing I do have to harp on is defense being very underrated in debates, player comparisons, and just overall skill in general. As in my personal view, defense is 100% a skill. And for someone like Giannis on the defensive end, he is highly skilled, one of the top 10 defenders in NBA history. And being very simplistic, defense still, even in today's NBA, is 50% of the game. And teams that win championships always, for the most part, have great defense. Look at this year's Golden State Warriors, and even the Boston Celtics, who finished runner-ups. And to give you guys some perspective on how far NBA players will go to discredit Giannis, look at the 2021 NBA Finals. In that series, Giannis averaged absurd numbers, and in Game 6, dropped 50 points and made virtually all his free throws. For the most part, this series was a masterpiece and a flawless performance. But even with that being the case, you had NBA players like CJ McCollum saying Middleton should have been MVP, or at the very least, gotten votes. That's how far current day players will go to downplay Giannis and his overall impact. And I hope after this video, once and for all, we kill every Giannis narrative about him not being skilled one of the best players regardless of era. Now with that finally being said, that is the end of the video. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.